So the electric guitar is an instrument that is useless without an amplifier. There's nothing there at all. It's like having a car without an engine, or an engine without a car. They need each other to be an entity. We've got guitar amps basically to amplify this, to make it audible to other people or yourself even, and also to be able to record with. Now I've got 3 valve amps and 2 transistor amps here, so I've got quite a breadth of stuff here. First one, I've got the Fender amp here. Now also, if you're listening on headphones, which I do recommend, there are a stereo pair of microphones just behind the camera here, which are getting an overall ambience of the room. So you're not just listening to the mic in front of the amp, you're listening to sort of the box as well. And that's really important. So, first of all, I've got the Fender amp here, which is a 40 watt all tube amp, which essentially defines the word Americana. So I've got myself a Fender Stratocaster here, and you heard the front pickup and then the neck pickup. 2 different sounds, but you can hear the silkiness coming from that amp. Now, I'm going to move on to the green one here that I've got down the bottom here. Now this is the Blunt Instrument VS315, handmade in southwest England. And you'll hear that it sounds quite different to the Fender. Now, of course, I've got to move the mic from here to here, so there will be some edits on this video, so you're not having to sort of look at me trying to wrestle with a mic stand. So here we are with the VS315. The mic is in front of the amp. You've still got the same stereo pair, and see what it sounds like now. Now the sound is rather different from this. The box is smaller, so you're not going to have the same sort of bass end that you'd have out of one of these bigger cabinets. And also this one has a tone and contour control, which is very, very different to the bass, middle and treble and presence that we all know from other guitar amps. So you can get quite a lot of range of sounds out of it. So for example, I could have something like this. It's a lot more wide-ranging than your traditional sort of valve amp controls, which themselves are quite subtle. Now, here we've got the VS20C, which is a transistor amp, originally designed by Michael Blunt to replace the traditional horrible school practice amplifiers. So once again, I'll just set the mic up here. Now this is the first transistor amp of the bunch so far. Now transistors and valves, is one better than the other? Dunno, is it? Depends what you want to do with it. Lots of people say I will only use a valve amp, and well, I don't really agree with that. I think transistor amps have their place for the sort of the jazzers and for the sort of funk guitar players. Transistor amps are often a much better bet. Why? Well, they tend to be a bit cleaner throughout. Valves do what, really what they do is they distort even harmonics, which are actually more consonant to the human ear. Transistors, however, distort odd harmonics, which are more dissonant. So you get a slightly more complex sound out of a transistor amp, and some people don't like it, some people do. Now, of course, the overdrive and distortion channels of some of these amplifiers is where you will really hear the difference. But for clean sound, you can get really bitey, very clean sound out of a transistor, and it'll pretty much be clean until the speaker breaks up itself, which is natural sort of terminology for a speaker distorting. So there is the VS20C. Again, we've got the same tone controls and contour of the 315, so there's quite a lot of range that you can have with this. You can get the sort of jazzy tones out of this, and well, you can get anything out of it. That's not to say you can't get anything out of the tried and tested sort of old designs of the Fenders and the Vox and the Roland JC120. They've been around a long time, but the person that designed these amps has been making them since 1972. So there's an awful lot of knowledge there. Now, moving on, we've got the second transistor amp of the bunch, which is this down here, just next to me, the Roland Jazz Chorus 120. That famous Japanese transistor sound. So if I just reposition the mic. That's rather different. And there's also two speakers. This is the first amp so far to have more than one speaker in. The effect of having two speakers is not only do you get a bit more volume, but you also drop the bass response by 10 Hertz every time you double the speakers in a box. So, and 10 Hertz is quite a lot to the bass end. So you do get a bigger sound with a bigger amp simply because the bass is lower as well as the volume level being a little bit higher. Now the other valve amp that I've got here is a Vox Ac30. Now I'll just reposition the mic there, and here we are with the AC30. Now, of course, I could demo all these amps with different tone controls and different this and different that, and to be fair, I have done it with these and not the others, but there is a sort of an overview of these amps in clean mode. Now, I'm just going to take the distortion channel of this AC30. This is one of the newer AC30s that features a sort of a preamp and a master volume. So I'm actually going to use this and then compare it with the distortion control on this little red one here, because then you can sort of hear exactly what distortion does to what valves do to distortion and what transistors do to distortion. So if I set this up here, okay, so now I'm going to go to the VS20C and do exactly the same. Just put the distortion control on and see what happens. So here we have the VS20C with the distortion. Essentially the preamp of this was full, and I brought this up to roughly the same level. In fact, there's actually a bit more gain on this. I'll just do that again. So here is the VS20C with roughly the same amount of gain that I had with the AC30. Of course, I could measure it with scientific instruments, but I'm not going to. I'm simply going to compare this and this. Now, I think that's pretty good for transistor distortion. Now, the way that distortion is designed in a transistor amp is to try to emulate those distorting of those even harmonics. Doesn't quite manage it, but really the convenience of a transistor amp over a valve amp, well, a transistor amp either works or it does not. Whereas a valve amp, obviously you have to look after the tubes, you have to, you might blow an output transformer if it's too loud, or you might do all manner of things to it. And also the components in a valve amp are under much more strain because of the high voltages involved. So safety first, if you were to go into any of these valve amps, make sure that you've left them a good few days before you even take the back off, because you have very large direct current voltages. That is, 300-400 volts, sometimes 450, and if you're unlucky, you touch one of those, it's death. So be very careful if you do any repairs to a valve amp where you're not really sure. So there is a bit of an overview of these amplifiers. We've got the clean sound from all of them, and then the distorted sound from just a couple of them so that you could hear the difference.